Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level.
We're back here again for another relationship discussion, and today we're talking about social media and its impact on relationships. And I mean, we could even get into an entire conversation around dating, like as dating somebody is even starting in social media and how that relates, and developing an honor code in relationships. You and I started talking about this one day because you talk about in Next Level Human developing an honor code on an individual basis. And then we started talking about developing an honor code for within the context of a relationship as well. So where do you want to dive in?
Yeah, well, let's talk about that concept, why it might be necessary. Because, one of the concepts we should maybe review that you and I talk about a lot, but I actually don't know that I've talked about it on the podcast yet, is the you, me dynamic. And that will get into the nature of relationships and why you want to kind of do the honor code thing. So in romantic relationships, and I would say in any relationship, and even in the way we relate to the world, there is the me aspect, right? Jade, let's say. Let's just pretend you and I are in a relationship just for the purposes of this podcast. So if there's me and we're in a relationship, then there's you, obviously. And then when we come together, we form this entity that I call you/me or you me. And that particular entity, I really think should be treated as a third party, right? And so you can kind of imagine this entity between us that when we are our best selves and we're out learning independently and growing independently and being the best humans we can and having experiences with other people and other things, we bring that energy back and it feeds into this you-me energy. That you-me energy begins to... One sec, let me... That's my dog who's, is looking to get fed. She's already fed. But so this you-me dynamic creates an entity that we can both put energy into and pull energy out of. And so you can kind of like, when you think of power couples and, people talking about, that they're a neat couple, what they're essentially saying when they say that is they're pointing to this you-me dynamic. So they kind of can recognize, all right, well, there's 2 individuals, but they make up a unique entity in and of themselves as a couple. And from my perspective, that should be honored. And it also should be seen that that particular entity can each help us grow, more likely to grow independently, and also allows us to do things that we probably couldn't do otherwise, or would make it easier for us to do some of the things that might be more difficult for us to do. So in that dynamic, I also think you should kind of treat it like its own entity and develop an honor code around that. So it's like, I might have things that I love and I'm interested in, and you might have things that you love and you're interested in, but that couple dynamic creates a whole new possibility. And it's basically deciding, what do we want to stand for? Like, so if you're in a relationship, what is it that you want to make sure that you bring to the world aside from your own individual selves? The honor code basically means like, okay, we're going to bring kindness, or we're going to develop, we're going to, be generous. We're going to volunteer in this way. We're going to be a positive inspiration and let people know that it's okay to express, to communicate in a particular way as couples, or to express physical affection as couples, or whatever it is we want to decide. And I do think it's important because we can then have an understanding of like, here's who I am, here's who you are, and here's who we are together. And so to me, that makes a difference. So that's kind of the way I see it. And I would be interested to see how you, what you have to add or how you see that. I do think it's very important, just because I think what happens is we tend to lose ourselves in relationships. And then what happens is, if those relationships dissolve for some reason, we end up losing ourselves and have a very difficult very difficult time finding ourselves. Also, I think if you have a strong you, me honor code, it also, I think, supports and allows the relationship to be something that we really value, that can sustain the relationship. So we have something that we never forget. We stand for this together.
Yeah, and I think that losing ourselves in relationships becomes an increasingly big fear as we get older, and we maybe have had past experiences where we have lost ourselves, and we don't want that to happen again. So that's a really big, important one. The other way that I really look at an honor code is the standpoint of a code of ethics, essentially, and being very clear on what various definitions are within the relationship. So for example, at Jade, if you and I were getting into a relationship, we would have a conversation about how do you define cheating? Because, and I'm just using that as an example, because a lot of people have a different definition of cheating, and we're going to feed this into the social media conversation as well. But that's a conversation that needs to be had, because you and I might have very different definitions of what that means. And there are some people who could consider something as small as like holding hands with someone of the opposite sex a very intimate thing. Not necessarily outright cheating exactly, but just not really acceptable. That could be considered like a gray area. Yeah. So maybe that's something that has to be factored into something like an honor code, and how you are going to honor each other and honor the relationship as an entity. Different things that can come into this are conversations around communication and trust, integrity, like showing up in an honest way, all these things. And this also may be something that evolves over time. So the more you get to know someone, the more the relationship evolves and develops, the more you get to know yourself. You may need to come back to that honor code and rewrite it to fit the new definition of the relationship. Because whenever there's any sort of big disagreement, maybe you even break up for a little while and you come back together, then in order to progress forward, you can't stay stuck in that old dynamic. You have to rewrite the rules of what is this relationship going to look like moving forward, and that's where the repair happens. That's where the beauty comes from, that you can then build a stronger foundation thanks to that communication and that disagreement or that breakup or whatever. That can actually end up making you stronger. Yeah. And then you can't have the exact same set of rules and expectations from each other and from the relationship if you are moving in a forward direction. That's the progression of the relationship, is it has to evolve and grow with each of you. So then you might need to revisit that as well. But ultimately, I think an honor code really comes down to how are you going to show up in an ethical way that supports your partner and the relationship, and really honors your partner in a really beautiful way, and the relationship and yourself, so you don't lose yourself, and showing up in a way that has a lot of integrity and is going to help the relationship to continue to grow.
Yeah. Hold that thought. Let me just grab this bone from this puppy. You just love making some noise, don't you? All right, so I'm going to just grab that and set that aside. Here's what's interesting. I like that definition of honor code, because I feel like it's an honor code and it's a contract. Mm-hmm. And I do think most of the problems that people have are around, like you said, expectations that they did not talk about until they get into the relationship. So I like the idea. And obviously some of these things are not, you can't foresee them. And like you alluded to, they do change. So thinking about this you-me dynamic and essentially saying, here's our honor code, here's our relationship contract, here's how we see things, right? Like, for example, just to kind of drive this home, some people see looking at pornography as cheating. Some people do not. That would be something that would need to be sort of worked out, right? Some people see that you want a certain amount of time together, or that you should be spending a certain amount of time with family, or there's things to be worked out about whose families are we going to be spending time with at holidays and all this kind of stuff. So I do think this goes into sort of the relationship contract and the honor code. And they're very important things. But I think that as soon as you start forgetting that you're an individual and they're an individual, and that there's this third entity that it needs to be managed sort of separately from your own lives, I think you begin to run into problems downstream. And so I think that is why that's so important. And to segue into some of the ideas around dating and interacting on social media and things like this, I do think that you as an individual set the stage for the kind of relationship you are going to have by the way you show up ahead of time. We oftentimes talk about the idea that the quality of a romantic relationship can never exceed the quality of the relationship you have with yourself. And ultimately, what I would be looking for in anyone that I was going to get into a relationship with is really the way they show up in sort of the small things. You and I talked about this idea that for me, if I get into a relationship, we're both on social media an awful lot, and I have an awful lot of female buddies that I will send things like, I don't know, a heart or a kissy face to or something like that, not meant to flirt, just meant as a sort of endearment and showing love. However, if I'm in a relationship with a girl and I get serious with someone, my code would be that I reserve those kinds of interactions for that woman. And simply because I have learned over time that it is a gray zone when you're looking at social media. Likewise with talking in DMs and things like that with people. It's almost like establishing this sort of understanding that this is a friendship-oriented thing, and I own the person that I'm with. One of the things that I think is a really important sign, I think especially with men, not as much with women, it's a gross generalization, those are always dangerous, but I do think it generally holds true, is men do seem to, especially younger men, and as they're maturing, do seem to have a problem with owning their female person. They basically are just like, seem to want to have all the, not be seen in a relationship, right? So they'll dodge certain things. They won't show their significant other love online, or they won't show pictures of them, or it's sort of like this hidden thing. And without talking about it, you can almost be like, well, that's no big deal. That's just kind of the way they roll. But I do think there's something behind that. And I do think it needs to be a conversation, because maybe it is not a big deal for you. But for me, right, it is. And I will show up that way online with the women that I engage with, and especially when I get into a romantic, sort of thing. And it does bring into this idea of like, all of this stuff matters now, because we do live our lives online now. So what is happening in the DMs? What is happening overtly out on social media? And it matters. And it matters a lot, and you have to have these conversations in my mind and decide how you are going to be, because this can cause lots of issues.
It is incredibly shady to me to be involved with someone, to be dating someone, and to be hiding the fact that you are seeing someone online. There's a difference between privacy and secrecy. And it's a very fine line, and everyone, I'm sure, would have a slightly different definition of that. But if you are dating someone and you are going out of your way to hide them behind closed doors, behind the wall of social media, so that no one knows that you're seeing anyone, I have a really big problem with that. And there are people who would say that that's only because I've been cheated on. I'm sure that plays a role, but I felt that way before I got cheated on too. And I just don't think that that's ethical. I don't think that that's honorable, and I think that that shows a huge amount of disrespect to the person you are dating and to the relationship itself, to not own that fact. Jade, you and I have been having conversations lately about what we look for in a potential like serious romantic partner. And one of the things that we were discussing was being really proud of them and to be with them. Nobody wants to be with someone who is hiding you behind closed doors. And especially if you have an online presence, particularly if you have an online presence that has a follower base that is mostly of the opposite sex, or same sex, depending on how you orient. But
which happens to be the case with my
exactly.
Yep.
Yep. So this is why you and I have had some really interesting conversations about this. I think it's particularly crucial to be very careful about how you are showing up, because there are people of who may be interested in you sexually, that if you are actively hiding or just going out of your way to not display that you're seeing someone, that doesn't feel good. That shouldn't feel good to either party. That's not okay. And there's, I'm not saying that you go on one date with someone and then you have to start showing them online. That's a conversation that you and your partner need to have to determine comfort level and everything else. But that's not a good look. Even if nothing is going on. I'm not saying that, that you are being shady in the DMs, but if you're actively removing that person, that is not a good look.
Yeah, and I think it does come down to just good communication. A lot of people don't want to have these conversations and never have these conversations until they come up. Now, of course, you can't predict every situation.
No.
And so what ends up happening here is conversations will come up and then you can adjust behavior. But in general, I think, remember, this is the Next Level Human podcast. We're not talking about people who are wanting to, that are young people just wanting to date and trying to get booty calls and all that kind of stuff. We're talking here about mature relationships, even mature dating relationships. And I would agree with you. I do think that if you're listening to this, though, we do have to talk a little bit about how we each show up. Of course, it's going to be different, right? And of course, it's okay in my mind to be however you want. However, once someone else comes into your world and you start to date them, this is a very Kantian way of looking at things. The goal for me, and this really comes from, the wording comes from the philosopher Immanuel Kant. It basically says, never manipulate another person's reality. So if you're DMing someone and they think that they're having an intimate, one-on-one interaction with you, and they are the only person you're doing this with, and you're doing that with 5 other people, to me, that is manipulating someone else's reality. It's better to have the conversation. Now, there is a gray zone there, right? Because as you're getting to know somebody, certainly I'm not saying that, oh my God, as soon as you start getting kind of close and flirty with one person, then you need to not be dating or having those conversations with anyone else. However, I think everyone knows when things start to get, sort of more integrated and intimate. And at that point, and that's going to be a little bit different for every person, but I do think you have to have that conversation. For me, I would say it begins as soon as there is intimate, sexual, romantic talk, sexting, anything like that. At that point in time, I'm wanting to begin to have that conversation. Now, for me, I'm different, though. I can imagine there are other people like, well, I enjoy, sexting with multiple people, and I just keep it light. It's kind of like dating, and as uncomfortable as this might be for some people, this is the world we live in now. A lot of people literally date virtually, right? So they are sexting and DMing with multiple people, and it's almost how they meet each other now, right? So before they ever meet, they're sexting and doing all this stuff. I think you have to have a conversation around that for sure.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I also gave an example, and then you and I sort of realized that we both do this, and I've done this for many, many years, because I worked when I was in the corporate world, I worked in a highly male-dominated industry. So my bosses were all male, most of my colleagues were male, and most of them were married or had serious partners. And I was always very hyper conscious of the fact that any time I would send an email, if I had to text them, anything like that, I would literally go through a mental checklist in my head and go, if I was their partner, would I be completely okay reading this email, this text message, whatever, and feel totally comfortable with that? Because to me, that's the approach we have to take, because that's how I would want someone else to take that approach if they were having a conversation, a digital or in real life conversation with my partner. Yeah. And I think that that's important to bring into the conversation about manipulating somebody's reality, because Jade, again, I'll just use you as an example. If, for example, you're in a relationship with someone, and I don't know that you're in a relationship with someone, because you're sort of Not because it's just not, general public knowledge, but because you're kind of like going out of your way to hide it a little bit. And I am then sending you messages that like are a little bit flirty or something like that. Even if I don't really mean anything by it, it would make me so uncomfortable if I found out after the fact that you were with someone. I'd be like, oh shit, like I don't want to upset his partner, even if your partner never saw it. I would feel really uncomfortable with that. And I realize that I maybe show up in a hyper honest way sometimes, but I'm okay with that. I would rather show up that way. And I think that, again, most of the people that listen to our podcasts probably feel the same way.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to, again, I mean, this is sort of new age woo-woo speak, and so I don't want people to be put off by it, but I just want you to consider this. You've heard it before, I'm sure, but it's this idea of the way you show up in the world is the way the world shows up for you. A lot of us are familiar with this. It's all over the self-development space. Some of you may or may not believe that. I have found, and it's just something to try on. I'm not saying that, this is the truth. I'm saying it is something to try on. I have found personally that the way I show up prior to meeting anybody is the kind of relationship I will end up having with that person. So I have decided for myself, I will show up in the way that I would want someone else who I have not yet met, who I might be developing a relationship with, to show up as. What that means is this. It means that if someone's flirting with me and I'm not sure if they are seeing somebody, I will probably just ask. I will probably just say, this is so nice. It's nice. Like, I love the turn that this has taken. I know we're getting a little bit flirty and trying to get to know each other. I'm not clear if you're seeing someone though. Like, what's your orientation around that? To me, it's like we almost need to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And they're only uncomfortable because no one's even thought to do that. But to me, that would be a really nice thing. If I'm beginning to flirt with someone and they're beginning to flirt with me, I would want that question asked to me, because it would tell me this is a person with integrity, with honesty, that wants to sort of know what the rules of the game are. I would basically go, oh, this is a communicative person. And that's the kind of a relationship that I want. And again, we're talking about next level human relationships. We're not talking about the games that most people play. And most of us know what this is like, and it's extremely frustrating. But when you're trying to do this online and you're moving towards this thing where you're like, I want a relationship where I have a defined honor code, good communication, honesty, integrity, someone that I can trust, in any relationship, whether it's defined as polyamory or whether it's defined as open or whether it's defined as monogamous, you still need to have this honor code and this contract. And I think the way that you behave online prior to getting to that point already begins to establish the kind of relationship you want, and will allow people to either come in or not. And I'll give you an example of how some of this works in my world. I have several exes that I'm very close with who have now started dating other people. So what I don't do is, let's say they're putting up mixed, media. Sometimes there's a belfie shot or, a sexual shot. Other times, in the story, there's a story of, them with their new significant other or whatever it is. I tend to take that into account. One, I typically will only like things that are either non-sexually related, that I don't want their significant other or them looking and being like, why is he always liking the shots where my ass is out, basically. I tend to go and make sure I like the shots where there's a couple shot or they're on vacation, and I tend to comment on the DMs in that way as well. Like, I'm not going to comment on a sexy picture. I might comment on like, oh, so you guys look like you're having fun. The reason I'm doing that is to establish both for that person and their significant other, if they ever see it, that I am committed to the friendship and that is no longer the way I'm going to be interacting with them. I do this also with people who I have been in a relationship with where we have stopped seeing each other and both of us are single. I then stop relating to them for the most part that way, unless it's sort of an open situation. And I do think this is the way that we want to begin to show up if we want to have the relationship we want. And let me just say one thing and get your take on this, Emily. To me, it's not the law of attraction thing, this whole idea of like show up the way in the world. I call it the law of recognition. It essentially just means if I show up a particular way, honest and integrity, and I have thought about how I want to behave online with the opposite sex and people that I might be interested in, What that does is when I start behaving that way, I can then recognize when other people are also behaving that way. So I don't know that it's like this new age woo-woo thing where I'm all of a sudden attracting them via polarity or whatever it is. It's just simply that I behave a way, and I can recognize when other people are behaving that same way. And more importantly, they can recognize when I'm behaving that way. And then that law of recognition goes, oh, this is a like-minded person. Oh, this is an honest and integrous person. Oh, this is someone that I really am perhaps interested in. There's nothing wrong in my mind with the whole dating, open relationships, polyamory, any of that stuff. Have at it, however you want. But make sure you communicate and you're honest about it. Otherwise, you're manipulating other people, in my mind. And that you do not want to do.
And the number of uncomfortable conversations and the quality of those conversations that we are willing to have is what will dictate the quality of our relationships. And there are so many of us who are so afraid to have these conversations. What's the worst that can happen? If we're starting a conversation that is about showing up with integrity and the other person does not respond well to it or rejects us or thinks that we're being over the top or whatever, do you really want to be in a relationship with them anyway? Because if they're actively avoiding showing up with integrity, that's not somebody I want to be involved with. Yeah. If I'm coming to somebody that I am dating and having that type of conversation and they start being really shady, that's going to flip some alarm bells for me. I'm going to be like, wow, if you aren't even willing to have this type of communication, I don't think that you're the right person. Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned bringing up, liking certain shots and stuff too, because I think there are a lot of women in particular out there. Again, that's a broad sweeping statement, but I think most people would agree with me on this. Women in particular who have an issue with men that they are in a relationship with, romantic relationship with, going out there and liking all the ass shots or following all the bikini models or whatever. And I see both sides of it because I see that it can be harmless. I also see that it can make people uncomfortable. And especially if it's somebody that you're involved with. I have one particular friend that during the pandemic, she and her partner were separated for 9 full months because of border issues and everything else. And she's not someone who tends to send nudes and stuff like that. And she did end up sending a couple more intimate shots because they were apart for so long. And she said it really bothered her when she would then see her partner liking ass shots on the internet because she's like, what benefit is me sending you a photo of my backside if you're out there liking all the ones on the internet of people that you're not in a sexual relationship with? So I would love to get your take on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to communication. I think one of the things that, again, these are gross generalizations, but I do think this is confusing for a lot of women. Men, obviously tend to be a little bit more visual creatures. They also can tend to dichotomize things a little bit more and segment parts of their life, right? So oftentimes, I know a lot of guys, and I was a young man too. This tends to be with young men, but men can typically do that. And a lot of women will take it as cheating, and that needs to be discussed. It's like, I do not like when you do that. It feels like, it's cheating. But a lot of men are doing that and not even thinking about their partner, right? It's almost like entertainment. It's sort of like for a lot of men. Now, meaning that it's entertainment in a sense. It has nothing to do with their significant other. However, still for me, right, I want to know how that would affect the girl that I am interested in. For example, it's almost like this. I have a lot of girl buddies, and so oftentimes we'll be out and we'll take pictures like when they come and visit or whatever. Then I might be dating someone. I'll even go so far as, because I'm also like, if someone tags me in something who's a friend of mine, I don't want to not repost it. I think that's kind of rude. So I kind of have that conversation pretty much off the bat. Like, let's say you and I take a picture and I'm dating somebody and I repost a picture you post on your story. I will pretty much probably DM the girl I'm dating and just say, hey, just so you know, I don't think you've met Emily yet, but we're, really good friends, totally non-romantic. I like setting up those sort of standards. And I do think same thing with a guy who basically, for me, I think the best approach for a woman is to say, listen, I noticed that, you are liking all these other shots and you don't necessarily like my shots or treat me the same way as I'm seeing you treat other women online. And then it's either A, I'm fine with that, but I'd like to know what that's about. Are you, is this just entertainment for you, or is this something that you're really open to all these different relationships? Or B, I'm not really okay with that. It makes me feel uncomfortable. If I'm with you and I'm intimate with you and I'm sexual with you, I want that for me. And I do think these are, look, the bottom line is, you said it, people do not want to have these conversations, and this stuff is going on all the time, and it causes extreme distress in many people.
And resentment.
And to me, you have to have these conversations. This is part of our romantic terrain now. The social media and the way we act on social media is incredibly part of this. And I would just say to the men, because I think this is mainly a male thing, but women as well, I think it's just mainly a male thing. I would be like, show up as a grown-ass man online in the same way that you would show up in a relationship. And I would say to everybody, show up on social media in your behavior in the way that you would want your relationship to go in person. It would be like me walking down the street with my girl, and every time another girl walks by, I release her hand and distance myself from her, right? How do you think that would make her feel? I really think it's the same kind of thing on social media. Or if every girl that walked by, I'm like, tracking her with my eyes and be like, damn, baby, you look great. That's kind of what it feels like online when you're doing that kind of stuff. And I do think our behavior matters. I oftentimes for myself go, if I'm DMing with a girlfriend of mine or even someone I don't know, I oftentimes go, if this person, significant other, if they're dating someone, or what would they think of me as a human in the way that I'm showing up here? And to me, it's just about having the conversations. Because let's face it, social media is a sexual realm now. It just is. We are and it creates distance, enough distance where it becomes, kind of a free-for-all of some weird behavior, right? Something happens when we're on the computer and we can distance ourselves from seeing someone in person and feeling the energy of a human in person, and we do a lot of shady stuff. Like I honestly think, there's, you girls tell me all the time, I mean, this doesn't happen to guys, but someone coming into your DMs and putting a dick pic or something like that and sending just really inappropriate stuff. I really think I've had some women just like, I just call that stuff out. I screenshot it and put it on my my story, and I out them. Part of me goes, I don't love that kind of thing in general, but I also do think if you're going to do that stuff, you should be ready for that. So I'm always looking at how can I show up as my best self so that if I do ever get in a relationship with this person, they know who I am before we even have that honor code relationship contract discussion. It makes it way easier because I just go, and it also means it defines my boundaries. How I show up is how I expect you to show up.
And this is, I just want to reiterate again that I know that for some people, this whole conversation might feel over the top. Might be like, really? Do I really need to be having these kinds of conversations? Like, this just seems like the nitty-gritty details that we don't really need to trouble ourselves with. And I love that you even mentioned, because you have all kinds of female friends, me being one of them. And I love that you would message your partner to let her know, hey, Emily just posted this photo of us. I'm just gonna pop it up in my stories. I know you guys haven't met yet. Hopefully next time she's in town, you guys can meet or whatever. Yeah. That simple little thing that so many people would consider to be overkill would make me as your partner go, whew, okay, that's cool. That's it. That's all it takes is one sentence, as opposed to all of the potential questions that can be raised by not saying that single sentence. So you're actually saving yourself so much time, trouble, and preventing resentment before it ever even starts to fester by having these conversations. Yeah. I can't stress that enough, that the communication is so crucial as part of this conversation. The communication has to happen. And if the communication happens, you might actually realize your partner is a very reasonable human being, as opposed to this rhetoric that I sometimes seeing happen, especially with, I do see this on both sides, I need to be clear, but it can happen more often in my experience with men referring to women as, crazy, or she's so pissed off about this and I don't understand why. There's nothing to be upset about. She probably wouldn't be upset if you just had the conversation. Yeah. That's all it takes. And I also really love the inclusion factor. because you and I have been having a lot of conversations about inclusion as well when it comes to romantic relationships, and making your partner feel included in your life, as part of your decision making, as part of how you show up in the world, not making everything revolve around them, but just including them. That feels so loving and caring, and that's really meaningful.
Yeah.
To offer someone that level of inclusion. And all it takes are these conversations. And you're just based on some of the things we've talked about alone, I feel like some people's relationships, if they actually put some of these things into place, your relationship satisfaction would absolutely skyrocket.
Yeah. I think just to wrap up, final thoughts for me, it's basically like this. You said, people might wonder why we're having this conversation. Well, the reason why is because I think one of the key points of this podcast is essentially you really do get the relationship that you tolerate and the relationship that you show up for. I absolutely think that is key. So if you're someone who is wanting a relationship, certainly you don't have to even think about this stuff. But I can guarantee you, if you do, you're far more likely to get the type of quality relationship that you want. It's literally just be the thing that you want to show up in your world. Not in a new age woo-woo way, in just simply a law of recognition way. And think this through. How do you want to behave in this regard? And by the way, having these conversations, right? Like if I'm a guy and I'm able to have this conversation, it does vet whether this woman is, emotionally unstable or not, right? Because if I have the conversation, it's the best vetting strategy. In other words, we say a lot of things about a lot of people, and it's hard for us to tease out what is my issue and what is their issue. Well, the best way to tease that out is simply to show up honestly and have the conversation. Because once you have the conversation, and by the way, it's not just the conversation, it's the conversation and saying, I stand for this, and then it's the other person seeing you take the actions that are consistent with what you said. Men fail all the time with this, and women fail plenty of times with this as well. But the point is, when I do that, now I really can vet the situation. Then I can really say she is emotionally stingy. She is emotionally unstable. She is unreasonable, because I've had the conversations and I show up this way. And it doesn't make her bad or him bad. It just makes me go, look, I'm a secure attachment style. I want another secure attachment style. I don't want an anxious, emotionally stingy, emotionally unavailable, emotionally avoidant, whatever it is, person. And when you show up honestly and authentically and behave this way offline and online, you are able to vet that very quickly.
And to your point as well about the attachment style, let's say, Jade, you're a secure attachment through and through. If you have these types of conversations with people, anyone who is anxious, not anyone, but there are people who swing more anxious or avoidant who will be able to swing more towards secure to meet you there simply by this level of communication. That's all it takes. Because, attachment theory can, and I'm not going to turn this into a whole thing about attachment theory, but it can, we can identify with it too much. And we can think that whatever we are, we're stuck with for life. That's not the case at all. It's very liquid, it's very fluid, and you can move in a different direction depending on who you're with. And if you're in a healthy, engaged relationship, then you might actually be able to find that it's incredibly healing for you in all of the best ways, for both parties, actually. Yeah. And just this entire conversation I just thought was really important, because it's more of us need to be having these types of conversations, and I think that everyone would have a lot more satisfying relationships if we discuss this stuff more often.
Yeah, here's one hidden thing that we can wrap up on when you think about this, right? It's like when you begin having these conversations from jump, a lot of what happens in relationships too is this subtle thing where it's like, I don't know that I want to be here anymore, and I don't want to have the conversation, so I'll just phase out, or I'll ghost, or I'll just become an asshole so that they'll break up with me. Well, when you start your relationships with these difficult conversations, if that comes around, because men are terrified of this. It's one of the things that I think women don't understand. One of the things that men don't want to hurt women. They can feel really guilty about that, and they don't like having the conversation, so they can be cowards around that. And to me, I go, if you start with having these conversations, by the time you need to have a difficult conversation like that, a conversation around, maybe I want an open relationship, I still want to be with you, or maybe I'm into polyamory, what do you think about that? Or because we do evolve and we do grow and our interests do change. If you start this way, those conversations actually become easy. And by the way, for you men, what would you rather have? A girl, who you had this conversation, who you never had any conversation with, and she's back, saying, what an asshole. This guy is such a dick. I can't stand him. Or, yes, I just really love him and he's a stand-up guy and I'm just hurt that, we're no longer together, right? It's like, when you're just hurt that you're no longer together and you're honest, there's a friendship that can remain eventually with distance and time. When you manipulate other people's reality, you don't show up honestly and in integrity, you're not going to be well liked by yourself or other people.
Yeah, beautiful point. And the last thing I'll say too is that, again, there's as there always are in any of these types of conversations, there's a huge amount of gray area and nuance. One thing too, when I mentioned the difference between privacy and secrecy, the other thing is that I'm also never saying, you have to show your partner online. But you need to be clear once you and your partner decide that it's appropriate and you both feel comfortable with that, to make it at least semi well known that you are with someone. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't actually show their face, because they might not be cool with that. I've dated people who are in the online space. I've dated people who are not in the online space. I am not necessarily super comfortable with displaying them in a really significant way, simply because I'm a very private person. But I will always make it clear if I am dating someone or not, even if I don't show their actual face. But I have those conversations with my partner, and I think that that's the most important thing to do.
Yeah, I love it. All right, we'll wrap up there. Thanks for hanging out, everybody, and we'll talk to you at the next show.
Bye.